The Second French Republic, spanning from 1848 to 1852, represents a brief but highly impactful period in French history. It was an era born out of revolutionary idealism characterized by a bold attempt to establish a social democracy, but it ultimately succumbed to internal divisions and the rise of authoritarianism and paved the way for the Second French Empire. The origins of this republic lie in the February Revolution of 1848. The fall of the July monarchy was the catalyst for change. The Second Republic was born from this revolution, which overthrew King Louis Philippe's increasingly unpopular and stagnant regime, facing severe economic crises and the king's stubborn refusal to enact parliamentary reforms. Reformers had organized what became known as the Banquet Campaign. These banquets were designed to circumvent laws banning political gatherings, allowing citizens to discuss suffrage and reform under the guise of private dining. When the government moved to suppress a massive Parisian banquet scheduled for February 1848, the city erupted. Riots ensued, leading to the king's abdication and the official proclamation of the Republic by a provisional government on February 24, 1848. The initial months of the Republic were defined by early progressive reforms, often referred to as the era of the Social Republic. This period was characterized by a wave of liberal and socialist idealism that sought to transform the very nature of French citizenship. Among the most significant achievements was the implementation of universal male suffrage. This move radically expanded the electorate from about 240,000 wealthy landowners to over 9 million men, regardless of property or status. Simultaneously, the Republic moved to address moral and human rights issues. Led by the efforts of Victor Schœlcher, the Republic definitively abolished slavery in all French colonies on April 27, 1848. In a further display of humanitarian idealism, the death penalty for political offenses was also abolished. Perhaps most radically yielding to socialist pressure from figures like Louis Blanc, the government recognized the right to work and established the Ateliers Nationaux, or national workshops. These were state-funded initiatives designed to provide employment for the thousands of unemployed laborers in Paris, signaling a new interventionist role for the state in the economy. However, the turning point soon arrived with the June days, as the initial unity of the revolution fractured along class and ideological lines. The April 1848 elections for the Constituent Assembly produced conservative results that shocked the Parisian radicals. A moderate and conservative majority was returned to power, largely elected by a rural peasantry that was skeptical of radical Parisian socialism and frustrated by the heavy taxes required to fund the new social programs. The new conservative government viewed the national workshops not as a success, but as an expensive economic failure and a dangerous breeding ground for radicalism. In June 1848, they ordered the workshops closed. This closure triggered a massive uprising as the Parisian working class rose in rebellion from June 23 to 26. The state's response was a brutal suppression. General Louis Eugène Cavaignac was granted dictatorial powers to crush the revolt. The resulting street fighting was horrific, leading to thousands of deaths and the subsequent deportation of thousands of insurgents to Algeria. The June days effectively ended the radical, social phase of the Republic and created a deep, lasting rift between the working class and the bourgeoisie that would haunt French politics for decades. In the aftermath of this violence, the Constitution of 1848 was drafted, reflecting a desperate desire for order and stability. It established a strict separation of powers between the executive and legislative branches. The executive power was centered in the office of the President of the Republic, who was to be elected by direct universal male suffrage for a single, non-renewable 4-year term. Legislative power was held by a single-chamber parliament, the National Legislative Assembly. This set the stage for the rise of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. In the presidential election of December 1848, Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Napoleon I, won a massive landslide victory, securing nearly 75% of the total vote. To understand this victory, one must look at his life before 1848. Louis Napoleon's early years were defined by exile and failed attempts to reclaim the Napoleonic legacy. He was born in 1808 to Louis Bonaparte, the King of Holland and one of Napoleon's younger brothers. The young Louis Napoleon was forced into exile after the fall of the First Empire in 1815, living primarily in Switzerland and Italy. He was driven by Bonapartism, the belief that a strong, charismatic leader should represent the unified will of the people. He attempted 2 amateurish military coups against Louis Philippe, first at Strasbourg in 1836 and again at Boulogne in 1840. These movements were supported by a core group of loyalist Bonapartist conspirators, including former officers of the Grande Armée, disgruntled soldiers longing for military glory, and romantic idealists who yearned for the prestige of the First Empire. Though both attempts failed miserably, they established him as the undisputed head of the Napoleonic cause. Following the 1840 coup attempt, he was sentenced to life imprisonment in the fortress of Ham. During his incarceration, he authored The Extinction of Pauperism, a work that helped cultivate his reputation as a friend to the working class. He eventually escaped to London in 1846, disguised as a laborer named Bedingue. He returned to France only after the 1848 revolution, initially maintaining a low profile before running for the National Assembly and eventually the presidency. During this rise, he was supported by the Party of Order, a coalition of monarchists, conservatives, and Catholics who feared socialist radicalism. He also leveraged a broad populist Bonapartist movement that combined authoritarianism with social promises, effectively positioning himself as a candidate who stood above traditional party politics. His broad appeal was his greatest strength. He was supported by the peasantry who remembered his uncle fondly, the working class who felt betrayed by the bourgeois Republicans, and conservatives who saw him as the only guarantor of order. However, his presidency was marked by a constant power struggle with his former allies, the Conservative Party of Order, in the National Assembly. A critical incident occurred in 1850 when the Conservative Assembly passed a law requiring voters to have lived in the same place for 3 years. This residency requirement effectively disenfranchised about 3 million people, mostly poor, itinerant workers. Bonaparte capitalized on this unpopular move. He publicly broke with the assembly over the issue, framing himself as the lone defender of the people's democratic rights against a reactionary parliament. This masterstroke of political theater was essential for the success of his future plans. The demise of the Republic came with the coup d'etat of 1851. A constitutional crisis emerged because the existing laws prevented Bonaparte from running for a second term in 1852. When the National Assembly refused to amend the constitution to allow his re-election, he plotted a total takeover. December 2nd, 1851, a date chosen for its symbolic connection to his uncle's coronation, he launched a self-coup. He achieved this through a meticulous three-pronged strategy. First, he secured military control by appointing loyalists to key positions, notably General Saint Arnaud as Minister of War and General Magnan as commander of the Paris garrison, ensuring the army would answer to him rather than the assembly. Second, he utilized the police force. His ally, Maupas, as prefect of police, orchestrated the secret, overnight arrest of nearly 80 opposition leaders and the seizure of printing presses. Third, he relied on the Society of December 10th, a private Bonapartist political and paramilitary group that served as street muscle to intimidate opponents. By sunrise, the National Assembly was dissolved and the city was plastered with posters announcing the restoration of universal suffrage to win over the public. Republican resistance in Paris was crushed at the barricades, and peasant uprisings in the provinces were swiftly suppressed by the military. To legitimize the coup, he immediately restored universal male suffrage and held a plebiscite which overwhelmingly approved his actions, though the vote was conducted under heavy control. This led to the transition to the Second Empire. Following the coup, Bonaparte ruled as a dictator for a year. In November 1852, a second plebiscite approved the re-establishment of imperial dignity. December 2nd, 1852, exactly 1 year after the coup, the Second Republic was officially dissolved. Bonaparte was proclaimed Emperor Napoleon III, marking the beginning of the Second French Empire. In summary, the legacy of the Second Republic is one of profound contradiction. It remains historically significant for permanently establishing the principle of universal male suffrage in France and for the definitive end of colonial slavery. However, its rapid trajectory from utopian socialism to bloody class warfare and finally to Bonapartist authoritarianism is one of the wildest turns of 19th century France. It birthed a modern political blueprint that would haunt France and Europe for many years to come. By demonstrating how a populist leader could use democratic tools to dismantle democratic institutions, Louis Napoleon created a template for the democratic dictatorships of the future.